In the depths of the Pariah Nexus, the mighty Sautek dynasty begins a conquest of the planet Bonadin Quintus. Phalanxes of emotionless warriors gun down the citizenry as they flee their domiciles, and the planetary defense force is swept aside as if they didn't exist. But the planetary governor's call for aid is answered by Captain Bauer of the Blood Ravens, responding with a hand-picked team of elite warriors ready to wipe out the Xenos scourge of the Necrons. Who will win in this game of combat patrol? Will the soulless machine warriors conquer all before them? Or will the secretive chapter of transhumans gain the day? Let's see in this game of Warhammer 40,000 Combat Patrol. Let's start by taking a look at the two armies that are going to be taking place in this great battle, starting with the Necrons. Armed with a tachyon arrow and an overlord blade, this Necron overlord is the warlord for the Sautek dynasty army. The core of his army is made up of warriors. There are 10 warriors there, 5 armed with Gorse Flayers and 5 armed with Gorse Reapers. Bringing some close combat capability to the army are 3 Skorpek destroyers, all armed with Skorpek hyperphase weapons, and they are accompanied by an unpictured plasma sight. Adding a few little Griblies, we have a Canoptek Scarab swarms, 3 bases of these, all armed with feeder mandibles. And there's a big boy here, a Canoptek Doomstalker, armed with a Doomsday Blaster, twin Gorse Flare, and Doomstalker limbs. Unfortunately, this was too big to fit behind the card with the scenery on the background there and still fit in the frame. On the side of the Space Marines, we have a Captain in Terminator armor with a Stormbolter and relic weapon. Accompanying him is a Terminator Librarian armed with the Smite psychic power, a Stormbolter, and a Force weapon. Then we have an elite 5-man squad in Terminator armor. The Sergeant is armed with a Stormbolter and Power Sword. The one Terminator has a Power Fist and Assault Cannon, and the other 3 are armed with Stormbolters and Power Fists. And finally, bringing actual fire to the firepower of the Space Marines, an Infernus squad, all armed with Bolt Pistol and Pyre Blaster, as well as the obligatory close combat weapon. The first stage of this game is to determine the mission and create the battlefield. Here is the battlefield you have. We've determined that the defender in this case is going to be the Space Marines, so they'll be deploying first. The mission that we're going to be playing is Forward Outpost. That gives you 4 objective markers, 2 in No Man's Land, 1 in each deployment zone. The deployment zone on the right is slightly hidden by the thermic plasma regulator, so apologies for that. Those objective markers in No Man's Land will score you 5 victory points in a turn in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th round, and the opponent's deployment zone will score you 10 victory points. So let's get into deployment. As you said, the Space Marines have taken the position of defenders due to a roll-off, and they have placed all their Terminator units, that is the Captain, Librarian and Terminator squad, into a single battle formation that is in Deep Strike Reserve. The remaining Marines, a single Infernus squad, are situated here around the objective marker, ready to move up and unleash some actual firepower on the Necrons. So the Necrons will be deploying everything all at once. The Necrons start by deploying a deranged squad of Skorpek destroyers. After this, they deploy their battle formation, which is a Overlord, well, the Overlord, the only Overlord that is, with their squad of, not destroyers, warriors. Getting word salad today, even though I've got a script. The Doomstalker is then placed just behind the Skorpek destroyers, ready to march forward and unleash its massive firepower upon the Space Marines. And finally, our little gribbly Canoptek Scarabs are right there in front of the Skorpek destroyers, just to do what they do, which is be annoying. Moving into turn 1, the Space Marines win the roll-off, thankfully for them, because they've only got 1 unit on the field. and they decide to get that Infernus squad into cover, moving there 6 inches and then rolling to advance a further 4 inches. The Necron player then moves up their Canoptech Scarabs, moving towards the objective marker. They decide not to advance and just meander up 10 inches, flying over stuff and getting just to the objective. It doesn't help them in this turn, but if they can stay on there, it will help them next turn. The Scorpec destroyers run up the field, moving their full movement speed, and then rolling to advance, and only managing to roll 1, so they don't go much further than they can normally go. Meanwhile, the Doomstalker makes its full movement and then rolls to advance a much more respectable 5 inches, getting up near to the middle of the board there. And anticipating a probable deep strike deployment by the Space Marines, the Necron player decides to leave their warrior and overlord right there on the objective where they were. And that ends turn 1. In the Space Marines turn 2, the Infernus squad here make a move towards the objective marker, putting them in range of potentially scoring it in the next turn. The Terminators arrive by deep strike on the far edge of the board in the Necron's deployment zone, 9 inches away from everybody else, ready to try and wipe out the Necrons in a rearguard strike. I think that's what they call rearguard strike. Strike from the rear, from behind. The Infernus Marines then take aim with their Pyre Blasters and shoot the Doomstalker. These do D6 automatic hits, and they rolled a total of 15 hits, which is absolutely a great number of hits. 5 of those hits actually managed to penetrate the Doomstalker's armor, leaving it on just 7 wounds left. So that takes 5 wounds off its 12. The Terminators now take aim at the warrior squad over there. They all but one of them are actually in rapid fire range, and that means they get double shots with their storm bolters, and they managed to shoot 14 shots at the warriors, hitting them with the storm bolters 7 times. The captain and librarian then add a further 6 shots to that total. This causes 5 Necron warriors to perish and disintegrate into the sand as they are lost to the sands of time, I guess, meaning that in the next X-Command phase of the Necrons, they will be taking a battle shock test, which could impact their ability to hold objectives. Alas, the Space Marines are not quite done with shooting yet, as they still have an assault cannon on the Terminator, who then fires 6 shots, scoring 5 hits, and 1 is critical on a D6. And thanks to devastating wounds, that turns into a mortal wound. As a result of that, 4 more warriors are destroyed, 1 to the mortal wound and a further 3 by failing their 4+ armor save, leaving the unit with just a single warrior to protect the Overlord. When the Necrons start their turn in turn 2, they score 5 victory points immediately because the Scarabs are within the scoring for this objective here. So that is good for them. That puts them in the lead. At this point, Reanimation's protocols kicked in. For the Doomstalker, it regenerates 3 wounds, which is fantastic for that. And a single warrior manages to put himself back together. Going back to the Scarabs for a moment, they move to consolidate their position around the objective marker to try and score some more victory points next turn. Meanwhile, in the rest of the movement phase, the Doomstalker moves towards the Terminators, and the Scorpec Destroyers move towards the Infernus Marines. To start off the shooting phase, the Doomstalker opens fire on the Terminators, getting 5 shots, plus 1 for blast, and 4 of its shots manage to hit. All 4 cause wounds. Now, the Canoptech Doomstalker's Doomsday Blaster, fantastic name for a weapon, has a -3 AP. However, Terminators have an invulnerable save as well, so they are able to use that invulnerable save to only allow 2 to die. And then the twin Gorse Flayers on the Doomstalker do absolutely bot all, and that's them. Meanwhile, the Warriors fire at the Terminator, scoring 2 hits, but they fail to cause any wounds whatsoever. On the other side of the board, the Scorpec Marines charge the Infernus Marines and make the charge. They then attack the Marines, hitting them 7 times out of 12 and cause 4 wounds. This does kill 2 Marines. 2 managed to make miraculously a 6+ save. I was actually using Wordbearer's dice for this, because I was playing the Marines. So I think maybe perhaps I made a pact with the Dark Gods for that one. The Marines strike back, hit the Destroyers 7 times, causing 3 wounds, but the Destroyers save all of their wounds, and that ends turn 2. At the start of turn 3, the Terminators move towards the Doomstalker, determined to get revenge for their fallen comrades. They then open fire with a hail of bolts from their Storm Bolters, including the Librarian and the Captains, scoring 11 hits against the Doomstalker. Despite scoring so many hits, this doesn't actually result in any damage to the Doomstalker. They only caused 2 wounds as they needed 6s, as the toughness of the Doomstalker is 8 compared to the bolts of the Storm Bolters being 4, so double, and they both fail to penetrate the armor. The Librarian's smite attack also unfortunately fails to wound it too. Hoping to do better than his comrades, the Terminator carrying the assault cannon then fires, scoring 4 hits, but only one of them actually wounds the Doomstalker and fails to do any damage whatsoever. Undeterred and determined to take down the Doomstalker, in the charge phase the Terminators charge in, crying for the unknown Primarch, and make it in with a roll of 6. The Terminators fight first, but the Necron Overlord uses the Mercurial Resistance stratagem to give the Doomstalker a 5+ invulnerable save. The Terminators then attack. They have 2 Power Fists attacking first, hitting the Doomstalker 4 times and causing 2 wounds, forcing the Doomstalker to use its invulnerable save. It saves one of the hits with its invulnerable save, but the other rips off a chunk of its armor, taking 2 wounds with it. Separately, the Sergeant uses his power sword and attacks the Doomstalker, attempting to get it into gaps in its limbs and try and take down an important part of it. But it only hits the Doomstalker twice, and only one causes an actual wound. The Doomstalker's invulnerable save fails it once again, and it loses another wound to the Sergeant's power sword. The Librarian focuses all of his power into his force weapon, hoping he can do some more damage, and attacks, hitting with all 4 of his attacks and causing 2 of them to have wounds. The Doomstalker manages to save 1 with its invulnerable save, but the other caused 3 wounds on a D3 damage roll. So that Doomstalker is not looking very healthy right now. The Captain then attacks with his relic sword and hits the Doomstalker 5 times, but only 1 causes a wound. Unfortunately, it's relatively low strength compared to the Doomstalker. Thankfully for the Doomstalker, its armor is safe by its invulnerable save and no more damage is taken. Moving to the other side of the table, the Necron player decides to attack with its Scorpec Destroyers against the Infernus Marine, and 9 of their attacks hit, and they score 5 wounds. So it's not looking good for those Infernus Marines there. In a miracle, the Sergeant's armor survives against the Necrons, but he does lose his 2 comrades, but he's still standing to hit the Necrons back with his close combat weapon, which manages to scrape off the armor and do no damage whatsoever. Meanwhile, the Doomstalker flays at the Terminators with its limbs, and it hits them twice, causing 1 wound, but the Terminator's armor is thankfully able to withstand those wounds. In the command phase, for Necron's turn 3, the Scarabs have remained in control of the objective in No Man's Land and scored 5 victory points, putting the Necrons on a total of 10 and the Space Marines on 0. In the movement phase, the Doomstalker falls back as far as it can away from those Terminators. Given that it's only on a few wounds, it's running a bit scared now, isn't it? The Overlord and his remaining warriors move in a position to allow them to open fire on the Terminators a bit easier. The Scarabs, meanwhile, fly over the board, their full 10 inches, and also advance another 4 inches towards the objective in the Space Marines deployment zone, given that that objective is worth 10 victory points in their next command phase if they can hold it. The Necron warriors then open fire on the Terminators, hitting them twice, both causing wounds. But thanks to the miracles of Terminator armor, one of those shots is stopped. However, the other one does cause a wound on one of the Terminators. He's lying there on 1 wound, with 2 remaining. The Necron Overlord decides to fire his Tachyon arrow and hits the Terminators, causing a wound. Now that Tachyon arrow is pretty powerful. It's only 1 shot, but it's a strength 16, -5 AP, D6 plus 2 wounds. So unfortunately that did kill a Terminator. Now at this point the Necron player realised that they'd forgotten to do their reanimation protocols. I offered to let them just go back and do that essentially as it were, but they chose to not do that. So we're going to have to make sure we get that done next time we play. Can't have that happening. In the charge phase, the Necron player decides to be bold and charges into combat with the Terminators, believing that maybe, just maybe, they can take them down. I don't think they can, but hey, who's for me to say they can't? The warriors attack first with their close combat weapons, hitting the Terminators with neither attack. Absolutely useless, aren't they? But the Overlord then hits with his Overlord blade, and of his 4 attacks he hits with 3 of them, causing 3 wounds. One of them a critical wound, which causes 2 mortal wounds on a Terminator. Of his other 2 wounds, they do breach the Terminator plate and kill the wounded Terminator and wounds the Terminator Sergeant. So the squad is decimated, all that is left is the single Terminator Sergeant, plus the Librarian and the Captain as individual characters. The Space Marine player, that is myself, decided to use my Infernus Sergeant to attack the Scorpec Destroyers because, let's face it, if I didn't, he wasn't going to get a chance. He hits the Scorpec Destroyers 3 times, scoring 1 wound, which basically scrapes off the Necrodermis, doesn't even leave a dent, not a mark, nothing. Those Scorpus Destroyers were not at all happy with that, being hit. They took it as a personal insult, so they delivered 7 hits against the sergeant there and causing 6 wounds. I wonder how this is going to turn out. Any guesses? Okay, you who said that actually the Terminator Sergeant would survive all hits, no problems, and then go back and destroy each Scorpec Destroyer with his close combat weapon in the next phase, you were completely wrong. Completely wrong. No, the Sergeant perished under sheer weight of numbers. He could not withstand that many attacks, and he died. So the Scorpec Destroyers basically consolidated 3 inches towards the nearest enemy, which is all the way over the other side of the board. So now I get to strike back with my Terminators. They strike back. The Sergeant with his power swords hits once, just once, destroys a Necron warrior, so that's quite good, isn't it? The Librarian then strikes again, only hits once. That's just not good luck there. He hits the remaining warrior and destroys him. So now this is it, 1-on-1, Overlord versus Terminator Captain. Well, actually it's just the Terminator Captain attacking the Overlord, but the Overlord is hit all 6 times by the Terminator with his relic sword, but only 2 wounds are scored on him. Now his Necrodermis is unable to stop the strikes, and the Overlord takes 2 wounds, but he has a lovely rule called Implacable Resilience. So each time an attack is allocated to this model, subtract 1. The Relic Blade does 2 damage per hit. He only takes 2 wounds instead of taking 4. And that is the end of round 3. At the top of turn 4, the Space Marines are locked into combat with the Necrons and see no reason to disengage and go straight to the combat phase, as it were. The Sergeant attacks with his power sword, hits the Overlord 3 times, causing 3 wounds. However, this only causes 2 wounds to actually do any damage, which loses the Overlord 2 of more of his 6 wounds, leaving him on just 2. So he's got to be careful now. He could be destroyed this turn. The Librarian goes next with his Force Axe, hitting the Overlord 3 times, causing just 1 wound, which the Overlord's Necrodermis manages to stop. The Captain in Terminator armor attacks next with his Relic Sword, hitting the Overlord all 6 times, but only 2 of those actually cause wounds, 1 of which penetrates the Overlord's Necrodermis, leaving him on just a single wound left. But now it's time for the Overlord to strike back, which he does so, hitting the Space Marines with all 4 of his hits, 2 of which are criticals, and thanks to the devastating wounds rule, this kills the Terminator Sergeant and causes the Librarian to take 2 mortal wounds. The final hit causes a wound, but the Librarian's armor is able to stop that, leaving the Librarian with 2 wounds, the Captain with no wounds, and the Necron with just 1 wound left at the end of the Space Marines' turn 4. It's the Necron's turn 4 now, and I am very nervous. I am not in a good position here. Anyway, they finally remember their reanimation protocols and take 1 wound on each the Doomstalker and the Overlord, leaving the Doomstalker on 5 wounds and the Overlord on 2. Whew. Now this is where I'm really losing the game. The Scarabs score 10 points for the objective in the Space Marine deployment zone, and the Destroyers score 5, putting the Necrons on they are now on 25 points, and the Space Marines are on 0, which is not great for me at all. Not concentrating the objective, so I need to wipe them out. But can I with just 2 models left? The Overlord falls back from combat. I think you can guess what's going to happen here. Of course, the Doomstalker moves in towards the Terminators. It starts off by firing its twin Gort flares, hitting the Marines 3 times, causing 2 wounds, but the Librarian's Terminator armor stops both. Now I know why they were doing this, because if they could kill the Terminator Librarian, it means all of their firepower from the Doomsday Blaster is now concentrated solely on the Captain. But now they've got to try and take out both with the single weapon. So here we go. The Doomsday Blaster fires. It gets 5 shots, with being at D6 plus 1. And it hits the Marines with 4 of them, all of which do wound the Marines. And sadly for me, the 3 of the wounds penetrate the armor, killing both the Captain and Terminator outright. The Doomsday weapon shots cause 3 damage each. The Terminator Captain had 6 wounds left, and the Librarian 3, so that was enough to kill them both, and thus the Necrons are victorious. There we go, a resounding defeat for the Space Marines, both on points and in terms of getting killed. What can you do? That's just the way it goes sometimes. I think the Space Marine Combat Patrol suffers from only having 2 units, as it were. One of Big Blob of Terminators is really good at combat, and the Infernus Marines, which are okay, but don't produce the kind of firepower I was looking for. But anyway, let's crack on with it, and we'll be back next month with another battle report, this time with the Drukhari versus Space Marines, but this time the new White Dwarf Combat Patrol. So we've got that in production already. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any comments or criticism, I love that. And like that smash button, and I hopefully will see you next month. In the meantime, keep rolling those dice.